Okay, so we've just used continuous mode to update what we're drawing every frame, right? And let's go ahead and talk about how we might develop a little bit more of what we might call behavior, right? So what we're going to do is, instead of drawing lines from the center out, wherever the mouse is, we're going to draw a circle. And that circle is going to change size based on how fast we move our mouse, right? Or how far we move our mouse between each frame. All right, so this is one result that might come from the sketch that we're going to produce together. So in order to actually achieve this, right, if we're wanting to look at behaviors, we need to start working with variables, right? And variables are a way for us to store some data, right? So data might mean a certain property, like how fast the mouse moved, a measurement, how far it moved, or a state of a physical characteristic, such as, has the left mouse button been pressed, right? So any variable, we can think of it as a storage device, and it will hold either simple, like a single value, or more complex, multiple values that might be known as arrays. And in that way, we can store data both in between each frame as the processing is running, as well as have variables that are going to be specified at the beginning and won't change throughout the running of the program. So in order to use variables in processing, we have to be conscious of the fact that they need to be declared with a unique and understandable name, as well as a specific type, before we can actually store anything inside the variable, right? So a brief conversation on data types, right? The simplest numbers, right? We can talk about integers, which are whole numbers, 0, 1, negative 2 million, or doubles, right? Or floats. Float means any numerical value that has a decimal point, right? So 1.5, negative 34.93, etc., right? So whenever we're assigning a value to a variable, let's say this is the name of my variable, right? I'm going to set it equal to some value. So this integer is going to be stored inside of this variable name. Similarly, if this is a float, 3.5 will be stored inside of it, right? So we need to be aware, or we need to predefine whenever we're using variables, that we need to specify a specific type. Okay, so once we've got variables, variables are going to help us start to actually define some behavior in our display window, right? And behavior occurs when interaction happens across objects or their properties, and they're going to be related by a fixed structure or a fixed relationship. So in the last case, in the previous exercise, the lines are always drawn to the mouse position, right? So that's a fixed relationship or a property, right? Each time we draw a line, the line may end up being different than the one before, but the line will always be drawn in a particular way. In the same way, we're going to draw our ellipses in a very particular way, right? And that's going to be that their position is going to come from where the mouse is currently, and their size is going to come from how fast our mouse is moving across the display window. Okay, so there were a couple of questions at the end of the last exercise, and we'll go over those as we develop this exercise. To recap what those topics will be, we'll go back over width and height as specific properties of the display window. We touched on what void was, but if you have more questions on that, feel free to drop them into the question window. And then we'll also talk about how to capture the viewport image. Okay, and that's an additional topic that we'll add as a bonus into this next exercise. So let's make a new file in processing. I'll close this one. right? And this exercise corresponds with 0-3 simple behavior, right? And again, we said that we want to, as our primary objective, draw circles that scale with mouse movement. All right. So if we were to break this down into pseudocode, again, we need to set up the setup. And there's some other things that are going to happen here. I'll call them setup actions, so we don't have to type it out again. This is going to be the same thing as what we did last exercise. And then we're going to do set up the draw, right, portion of our file. And this is going to be different, right? This is where we're going to start to develop more behavior and use our variables. So inside of draw, we are going to first declare a variable to store the mouse speed. I'll put this in quotes, right? How fast the mouse is moving in the current frame. Then we need to define that variable, the speed variable, by calculating the speed. All right. Then we're going to define a fill color, and if you want to, we can also do a stroke color here. And then lastly, we're going to draw a circle. Okay. And remember that the circle is going to use the speed variable. All right. And then here at the end, we have a question about capturing the viewport or the display window. All right, so we'll come back to that at the end. All right, so let's set up the setup. Again, we're just going to type void setup, open parentheses, close parentheses, open curly bracket, come down below and close the curly bracket. And here we need to define the size and the background color. So as we did before, we're going to define the size. Let's do 400 by 400. And our background color is going to be white. So that's 255. All right. And that's all we have to do up here. So we can just bounce down to the next portion. And again, we'll do our draw method, and I'll close the curly brackets down here. All right. So now we need to declare a variable, right? So if I were to go back to my reference, under data down here, primitive, here are basic types of data that are going to go along with any value. So we're looking at speed. All right, so that might be an integer, but it's probably going to be more likely a float. So if we click float, right, here's some additional information for us, right? So we can either declare our variable, or we can actually declare and define it at the same time. So we're going to do it step by step. So here in processing, we're going to say that the variable name is going to be a float, and let's just call this speed. Remember that it's good to have variable names. This is the type, and this is the name. We want to have variable names that are clear, right? Easy to understand. All right. So there's our float speed, right? And now we need to define the speed, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say that speed is going to be equal to, and we're just going to use a simple expression here to get the speed, right? And speed is really just how far the mouse has moved this frame. So we're going to use the absolute value of mouse x minus p mouse x. And this is another keyword. This is the previous mouse position. So this is the current mouse position, and p mouse x is the previous mouse position. All right, so we're going to add that to the absolute value of the same thing for the y. So mouse y minus p mouse y. Okay, so this is the expression that's going to calculate the speed, and that's going to fill this variable with a value. All right. The next thing that we want to do is we want to define a fill color. So I'm going to use my my favorite cyan color that we've been using to keep things consistent. So fill, open parentheses, 0, 120 or so, 255. And I'm going to add a fourth value, which will be our transparency value. So if I say 200, this will be relatively transparent, and that way we can see the previous circle and the new circle. And this is something we can come back and change. We can remove it and see what happens in terms of what that does to the graphics that we've developed with the program. But for now, let's add in that alpha value here. Again, that's going to be between 0 and 255. All right, so now we need to draw a circle. Okay, now this one may be a little bit more tricky than we might assume. So if we go to our reference, right, if we were to go to our main language page, if we look for, by doing Control F, circle, we're not going to find anything, right? So here's a challenge question for you. What type of geometry does circle actually fall under, right? This type of geometry is not always a circle, but it can be. If you have a suggestion, go ahead and drop it in the questions window, and we'll see if we can't find that. An alternative approach to thinking through how we might draw a circle would be to look at the 2D primitives options here under shape. All right, well done. You guys found it. It's ellipse. An ellipse, if we specify the same radius for width and height, we'll get a circle, right? So an ellipse is how we'll draw a circle inside of processing. All right, so back here in our text editor, let's go ahead and say that we want to create an ellipse. And its position, it's going to be located at mouse x, comma mouse y. And the two radius values for our ellipse are going to be defined by our variable, which we've declared and defined here. So speed. And again, use speed again for the second radius value. Terminate with a semicolon. And now we should get circles that scale. If we move faster across the screen, they should be bigger. And if we move slower across the screen, they'll be smaller. All right? And it's, again, you can see that because I've specified a transparency value, we can see circles behind the circles that are being created currently, right? So again, as we draw, things are being drawn on top of the previous set of circles, right? So the key thing here is that time, or the current frame, is going to be on top, and everything that happens subsequent or previously is going to be below, right? So I can just kind of color this in and fill it in with circles everywhere. And now I have one version of what this program can produce. Okay,